Okay. Good morning and namaste. Welcome back to our weekly Bhagavad Gita. This session is going to be the last one in the second chapter. And the second chapter, of course, is titled Sankhya Yoga. It's about the yoga of the sort of basic understanding, the things like Atma Tattva and how the mind and senses are related. And these are indeed topics that we do cover in Sankhya. I think the second chapter, in one sense, it can sometimes be something that people sort of skip over. Okay, this is very basic stuff, but you can think of it also sort of as a toolbox for someone who really wants to delve deeper into yoga practice, because yoga really is focused, it's not focused on the body and the asanas or even on the breathing, it's focused on the mind, on being able to make the mind in a stable and peaceful condition where we can absorb ourselves in meditation on the Supreme. So we're doing 4 verses, and I think they're really, really good ones. We're going to, of course, they're all good ones in the Gita, but these ones I think are especially relevant. Okay, so I'd like to start by offering pranams to my gurus, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Hasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. So chapter 2, verse 66. Nasti buddhira yuktasya na cha yuktasya bhavana na cha bhavayata shantir ashantasya kuta sukham. One whose mind is uncontrolled does not have the intelligence to understand the science of the soul. Such an unintelligent person is unable to meditate on the Supreme Lord. A person unable to perform such meditation cannot attain peace. And without peace, where is the possibility of happiness? So when we talk about verses that really you want to have in your serious yoga practitioner toolbox, I think this is kind of an example of, a very critical verse, really, because what is it saying here? If someone is, if they do not engage their mind, if their buddhi, if their intellect is not yukta, if it's not engaged in yoga, then it's very hard for them to have peace. And without peace, how can we have happiness? This is it's full of very beautiful concepts, because think about it. Without peace, there can be no happiness. How true is that? If there's conflict, if there's quarrel, externally, we don't feel happiness. We feel happiness generally in a more harmonious environment. Holidays are coming up. Holidays are times when people often get together with family. The mainstream TV picture of family get-togethers is very harmonious, but also then there are the funny movies that portray it as a time of disharmony and craziness and shouting arguments and drama and people stomping out. And these are not happy times. And in fact, holiday times are often times when there's an increase in suicides, depression, and so forth. Why? Because conflict doesn't make us happy. But Bhagavad Gita is really focused on the internal conflict. It's focused on the conflict of, okay, you are Atma, and Atma has this blissful nature, spiritual nature, eternal nature, but you're stuck in this body, in this world where everything's temporary, everything's changing. The body is getting older every day, we'll like it or not, and whatever happiness that we can grasp for that's related to the body, it always slips through our fingers. There's really two things that are always true. There's no happiness that we get that's going to stay with us forever. It always leaves us, unless it's happiness related to the Atma. And there's also no pain and suffering that stays forever. Every type of pain and suffering has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's another verse from the Gita. We'll discuss that in another class. So if one does not get some control on the mind, if one is not able to engage the mind, it's not possible really to understand this yoga, the yoga system, and how to connect with the Supreme Lord. So, this is, again, it's one of these sort of dichotomies between if it feels good, do it, the sort of, hedonistic approach of, do whatever makes you feel good as long as you don't hurt anyone, it's fine. As opposed to in the yoga system, we say, okay, look, you need to engage the mind. The mind can be your tool of bondage, or it can be the tool of your liberation. So one has to be able to engage the mind to be successful in the yoga practice. And then one can actually get peace, because peace will come when the mind is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires. So this is the conflict. The mind is the center of all the senses, and the senses naturally gravitate toward sensory gratification. You can't just stop it completely, but there needs to be a certain degree of detachment. We have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to do certain activities to keep the Atma and the body together. But, if our focus is inward, if our focus is on upward, on making that connection with the Supreme, with the Divine, then all of these other activities, they sort of take a secondary role. They're helping, they're assisting. We're not making those the aim of our life. Whereas if we're just chasing after fleeting pleasure, Krishna is telling us this, if we are chasing after that, we're not going to have peace, because as soon as we try to gratify one desire, that gives rise to yet another desire. And so we have no peace, and without peace, we do not have lasting happiness. Now, the next verse here, this is another really great verse for adding to your toolbox of things to think about for being a serious student of yoga, serious yoga practitioner. And one needs to be a student before one can be a teacher, right? So if someone wants to be, wants to be a yoga teacher, wants to help lead others in the path of yoga, one also needs to be a serious student. Indriyanam hi chalatam yanmano nuvidhiyate tadasya harati pragyam vayurnavam vivambhasi. So this is a very colorful analogy. Just as the wind sweeps away a boat on the water, the mind of an unrestrained person runs behind any one of the senses that wanders toward its sense object. So this is it's a very colorful analogy, and if you think about it, think about a boat. Okay, a little boat, and you've got a sail, and suddenly the wind starts blowing. What are you going to do? Oh, it's a little boat with a little fixed sail. I don't have a way to furl the sail, and it's just going to get carried away. So that's the nature of the mind. The mind is connected to the senses. So this is another side of the mind as the center of the senses. Because the mind's the center of the senses, the mind gets pulled. When the senses are pulled along, the mind gets pulled along with them. Any one of the senses, it can carry away the mind. So in this verse, Sri Krishna is telling us, how it works, that we can, if the mind is not controlled, it's very easy to be carried away. All right, so and we're skipping over verse 68. Now this is a really interesting verse. Ya nisha sarva bhutanam tasyam jagarti samyami yasyam jagrati bhutani sa nisha pashyato munehe. Spiritual intelligence, which is directed toward the soul, is like night for materialistic common people who are enchanted by the material energy. One who is sthita pragya, however, remains awake in that intelligence. And when intelligence is absorbed in sense objects, the common person remains awake. For the sage who perceives transcendental reality, that consciousness is the darkest night. In other words, such a person accepts sense objects in an appropriate way without being attached to them. We could also sum it up in a very short way to say what is night for those who are on the path of sense enjoyment is the time of awakening for those who are on the path of realization. And what is day for those who are on the path of realization is like night for those who are materially absorbed. So there's a lot of very deep meaning here. And if you think about it, consider, again, we had discussed this very briefly. What's the meaning of materialistic? Well, often when we say materialistic, we refer to someone who's really focused on things, who's focused on how much money and what do I get, and who's very selfish and who does not think about doing things that benefit others, but it's only about myself and how much money and how many material things I have. I always appreciate the approach of saying, like sometimes if you go to someone's house and they're really worried about, oh, you've got kids with you, make sure they don't jump on the sofa, make sure they don't walk on this carpet, blah, 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 blah. Or other people take the approach, well, people are much more important than things. And that's especially reassuring when you have small children who can be a little destructive. But the point is, that's kind of what I think many people will think of when we say materialistic. When we're talking about materialistic in the context of the Gita, we're talking about when the focus of life is on, yes, money, things, having happiness through accumulating things, but it's also about being focused on the bodily existence. Now, if you sat a group of people down and you ask them, who are you? I'm almost going to guarantee you that, even if you brought out people in a yoga class, you are likely to get very different answers. Someone's going to say, well, my name is such and such, and I'm the mother or father of these children, and I'm married to such and such person. Another person might say, well, I am my consciousness. I am my state of mind, and that state of consciousness varies from time to time. And someone else may say, well, I am the Atma. I read a really nice quote from C.S. Lewis, who many people know as as an author of science fiction and fantasy, but he was also a very serious theologian, and he wrote some very interesting books on theology. And he said, you don't have a soul, you are a soul, you have a body. I just thought that was really funny, coming from someone whose focus is on Christian theology, that he had that perspective. Although that's not really surprising. The Gnostics, they followed very much a very similar path in Christianity of what yoga practitioners do, in terms of looking at Jesus as their guru and considering that the Atma is the self and the body is a temporary thing. So getting back to this verse, I digress here, and I do that a lot, and I'm not going to apologize for it because I think it does make things a little interesting sometimes. But it's sort of like things are backwards. Think about, okay, visiting Vegas. Everybody is likely to visit Las Vegas at some point. Why not? It's got so much going on, and you just have to go there to check it out sometimes. But, if you really are trying to develop your consciousness, you might find it grates on you a bit. Some people are very excited. Wow, there's places I can go and get drunk all night and vomit and, then pass out in my hotel room, and I can go to another club the next day and do something different. But, if you're trying to cultivate your consciousness, you feel, oh, my God, there's so much energy here. It's so heavy and so intense. And people are they want to gratify their most base instincts as much as possible. So some people are going to say, hey, great, Vegas, baby, let's go, let's do it. And other people are going to say, oh, my God, it's like, okay, people are smoking indoors and the energy is just horrendous. I got to get out of here. Okay, this was not worth it. So this is an example of this sort of, it's backwards. And the same person who loves Vegas, if you take them to an ashram where there's natural beauty and, hey, we're going to get up at 6 o'clock and we're going to go have this very beautiful early morning yoga session and we're going to meditate. And they're going to say, oh, my God, I'm in hell. I want to get a drink. I want to get a steak. I want to go. You may have heard this before. So this helps to put it in perspective. When you are on this path, you're not going to want the same thing as other people, and that's okay. That's a good takeaway to have here. And this is the final verse of the second chapter of the Gita. It's a beautiful verse. And this, I think, it's kind of like a little gem to keep in your toolbox of things for someone who wants to practice yoga. Apuryamanam achala pratishtam samudrama pravishanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve sashantimapnoti nakamakami. Just as countless rivers flow into the ocean, which is full and always still, without causing any disturbance to it, similarly, various desires flow into the mind of one who is sthita prajna, yet his equilibrium is never disturbed. Such persons alone can attain peace, not those who strive always to fulfill their desires. So this is a beautiful verse. Think about it. Think about it. We want the mind to become like the ocean. All these huge rivers are flowing into the ocean, but they don't disturb the ocean. The ocean is always as it is. The ocean can be sometimes disturbed by wind and it creates waves and so forth, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about, you've got mighty rivers like the Amazon, which is a mile wide when it enters the ocean, and the Ganga and the Nile and the Mississippi, and these huge rivers are flowing into the ocean, but the ocean remains the same. So what are the rivers compared to? The rivers are compared to the incessant flow of desires. Our senses are always naturally reaching out towards sense objects because we want, the senses naturally crave some gratification. You can't just go cold turkey and cut yourself off from all sense gratifications, all sense enjoyment. That's not possible. It doesn't really work. Believe me, I've tried it. It doesn't really work. But you need to keep a perspective. You need to keep a balance and not chase after. You don't want to, it's called putting the carriage before the horse, right? Except that the horse in this case fits in with another type of analogy. So we want to, for example, we want to eat to live, not live to eat. Another way of saying, if you pursue things based on how things taste and what I want to eat, instead of thinking what will be helpful to keep body and soul together, what will be helpful to nourish my health and my pran so that I can practice my spiritual practices, it's the same thing, but from a different perspective, with a different emphasis and a different goal. Now, this verse is and actually this whole series of verses that we discussed today, these 4 verses that we discussed today, these are all Krishna answering Arjuna's question, what are the symptoms of a person who is sthita prajna, the person who is situated in transcendence, who is fixed in and not just in their spiritual pursuit, but they actually are realized. What are the symptoms? How does that person sit? How do they act? How do they eat? How do they talk? And Krishna is answering. So that it's not like there's some switch that you flip and you say, oh, well, I'm going to become a spiritual person, and suddenly I'll flip a switch and the desires don't pour in. Well, I have news for you. You know, I moved into an ashram and I took up the life of a brahmachari when I was very young. I was actually 15 years old. Well, think about what it was like when you were a teenager. You know, your senses are raging, and they just are going nuts trying to carry you away. And if you then say, well, I'm now going to practice a very simple lifestyle, and I'm going to, you know, give up having material possessions and material pursuits, and immediately the first thing that you think of are all the things that you're not supposed to do, isn't it? You know, like, for example, you know, tell someone, okay, you need to give up eating sweet stuff, and because, you know, you're at risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Well, what do? You think about all the sweet things that you suddenly crave. Well, the trick is that if you can let those desires, let the rivers of those desires flow into an oceanic and calm mind and just say, well, I'm going to let the rivers flow. I'm not going to let it make the ocean overflow its banks. And you tolerate them, then eventually it becomes tolerable. You can learn to tolerate anything. This is one of these big tricks that we learn in the yoga system. You can learn to tolerate anything. Why? Because the mind is endlessly adjustable. Just like a fast. I don't know if anyone has ever done a major cleanse. I was also fairly young, and I had some serious staph infection, and I was on antibiotics. I went to India. I got an even worse infection, and I think I had a blood staph infection. Fever went up to about 106. And didn't have medical care or anything. Finally got over that, and then someone suggested I do a cleansing fast. So I had fruits and vegetable juices for 1 month, and that really cleaned me out. I lost weight, but I was already thin because of the disease. But that was it was very cleansing. Well, I'm not recommending that necessarily, and in fact, in Ayurveda, we don't recommend such an aggressive approach to fasting. But the point is that the first few days was, oh my God, I want to go have some khichdi. I want to go eat something. I want to go have some paneer. You know, but after a few days, I just sort of, you know, get past that. Okay, well, I'm going to go have some fruit. And again, that's the kind of thing that works more for someone who's Pitta Prakriti. I was very extremely strong Pitta Prakriti at that time. And for someone who's Vata, it would be very imbalancing. It may be cleansing for Kapha Prakriti. But again, our approach to fasting in Ayurveda is very different. This was just a very simple type of purge thing. But my point is that someone who does that, you know, you have this urge to break your fast, to not follow that. And if you tolerate that, it always gets easier. And then you don't even think about it. And then finally you say, oh, okay, well, I've done this long enough. I've achieved my goals, and now I'm going to end it. And by the time you've gotten to the end of it, then you don't have that sort of pressure anymore. So I'm going to end there, and we have completed the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Thank you and congratulations for reaching this far. This is one of the longer chapters in the Gita, and it has a lot of the sort of basic philosophical things, but as I said, it's kind of the basic toolbox, and these are things that you can kind of take out every day and look at them and get new light on things and analyze the world. These are, you know, verses from the Gita that give you a lot of ability to look at behavior and so forth. So yes, this recording will be posted in the Gita forum. And so then our next session, I believe, is going to be next Wednesday, and then we'll be starting with Chapter 3. So thank you very much, and namaste.